welcome. It's our second discussion of London Fashion Week, and it's so early in the morning. But we are here to talk about Sister by Sibling, which is very exciting. And I have a fabulous London panel with me who will introduce themselves.
I'm Fred Butler. I'm an accessories designer and blogger. That's me.
I'm Mandi, Lennard, and I run a fashion consultancy called Mandi's Basement.
I'm Tozer. I'm a photographer and a filmmaker.
I'm Hettie Judah. I'm a writer.
I know we're talking about Sister by Sibling, so this is a bit cheeky, but I want to start by talking a little bit about last night's show, because I saw both of you guys there, which was the Central St Martin's show, because obviously it's a very important one. What did you guys think?
Well, on a knitwear tip, there was one amazing one, the origami. I couldn't figure out how that would be possible, so, and it was all blue, which I love as well.
Yeah, the blog.
What was the name of that designer? Do you remember?
I cannot remember.
Well, I have the show notes, and we were really careful to make sure that we kept, and then when I went to the parties afterwards, I kind of clung onto this document.
Yeah, you have to.
But I left it at the last party. So,
oh no!
So I went online this morning to try and figure out who the ones I like was, but the problem is that the websites that the pictures were on already, they don't put...
Yeah, I think that's a real problem with student shows, isn't it? When they show in like whole sets, is you don't get the individual names. Yeah.
Fashionista had that problem for a long time, but now I think people do write Fashionista and then they write the designer next to it.
Yeah.
But can you imagine, you know, when they used to get reviewed, it would just be... Yeah.
What were the looks and the sort of collections within the collection that really stood out for you?
I really loved the vinyl with the blanket stitch around the edging.
Yeah.
Can't believe I can't remember her name. And then there were these amazing, and these are actually, I thought I preferred the one I just mentioned, but I've woken up this morning really excited about the one with the Lurex long dresses with these amazing silhouettes, and they were really, really long, and almost the models should have been on casters going down the runway, because they were just the most beautiful shapes, and I could just see somebody like Lulu Kennedy wearing them for a party straight away.
And looking awesome. And I think this is what everyone says is what makes London so exciting, isn't it? It's that kind of studenty, kind of mental vibe that everyone always talks about, which I think does annoy people from London, because they're like, you know, we're not just about like nuts people wearing balloons on the catwalk and stuff, but it is that kind of energy that makes London seem really relevant, and that's very sort of key to the appeal of Sibling, I think, is that kind of humour and excitement. What do you guys think makes Sibling so great? Why is everyone so obsessed with them?
I think it's a really interesting mix of luxury and a lot of fun, and I think it's one of the labels that has really helped redefine what we understand as luxury. I think, you know, the Japanese market, they're very ready to embrace luxury as a lot of fun and quite wild and quite out there, but there is still a sort of quite a conservatism in a lot of the luxury particularly in Europe, and I think Sibling is very much at the forefront of sort of helping to redefine that.
That's interesting. Would you agree with that, Hettie? Because you've looked at a lot of young designers. Do you think that part of their success does come if they make people be able to see something as covetable that isn't?
Yeah, but I mean, they're also bringing this kind of delectable camp sensibility into it as well, and really in a very in-your-face fashion with menswear, but also very wearable. And we were talking earlier about their collaborations. They collaborate quite a lot with graphic artists and you know, on creating very interesting designs and experimenting with what you can do with pattern and knitwear as well. And so they are creating something that's very much apart. Then there's also this thing where they will do, you know, a very big pattern in very, very bright colours, and then they'll throw sequins at it on top of that. So it's like, you know, why stop there? Why not to go a bit further? More sequins, more, you know, more beads, more pom-poms on top of things. So there's that kind of glorying in that fractional kind of edge of bad taste and naughtiness and unacceptability as well.
Have you all noticed this kind of a shift in, you mentioned this idea of luxury in a market for things like that, where, you know, if people are going to spend some money, they don't just want to buy a kind of discreet leather handbag anymore. Do you think people are fully kind of embracing stuff that is a bit more, you know, like outlandish and exciting?
I think more and more, yeah.
I think also if you're just going to buy, you know, it makes it easier to buy maybe, you know, fairly discreet pieces and then just have one piece that's really kind of shoving it out there.
It seems like such a simple idea what they did. You know, they were like, we're going to make really great, cool, fun knits. We're going to do it for guys. We're going to make something really exciting. Why had no one thought of that before?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously they're doing it with knitwear, which is very much their thing. I mean, when I was thinking about their men's collections, it does also remind me quite a lot of what people like Bernard Wilhelm and Walter van Beirendonck were doing in terms of, you know, perhaps taking influence from kind of traditional folklore clothing or kind of anthropological, kind of images that you'd see in books of anthropology, and kind of quite tribal dress, you know, so where they've got the kind of face coverings and the big headdresses and this kind of thing going on. So I mean, there are kind of other designers who I think you can take as a reference that weren't necessarily doing it in knitwear, but there have definitely been these kind of shapes and that kind of drama and use of colour and outrageousness happening before. I mean, I think what's interesting with knitwear is that it's obviously a discipline that you associate with natural materials usually. And they've really kind of gone right to the other extreme and gone way into the artificial and the artificial colours and that sensibility.
Mandi, talk to me a little bit about how they've grown their brand and what you've been impressed by and how they've done that. Because obviously
I think what you were saying about knitwear, it's like a trend of knitwear. Knitwear's back, isn't it, in a big way, and everyone's doing chunky knits and what have you. And they've been very much about opening the gateway for that, I think. And they're very proud of their Britishness. So actually the traditional yarns, even though they do these incredible innovations with man-made fibres, they are very, very proud of the merino wools and all these other natural permutations of knit.
I'm really glad you mentioned that British thing, because that's something I actually wanted to ask about, is whether you think that's a really important part of being a young designer working in London, because we had quite a long conversation about whether people who are ambassadors for fashion should wear British clothes, because we were talking about Kate Middleton. I didn't know how she came off one of our panels, but she did. And it got me thinking about, you know, is that a real characteristic that makes a young brand really brilliant if they do what, you know, like Louise Gray does and really champion British manufacturing? Do you think that's something all British young designers should look to do?
You know, when you're a young designer, you're going to have your stuff produced where it's more cheaply produced. So actually, if it's going to be produced more cheaply abroad, they're going to have to do that. And I don't think at that stage it's too much of a problem. But when they do produce here, they're very proud of it, and they feel those emotions of pride.
Do you think there is almost a market for making that your kind of like your unique selling point, to be like, yes, I've spent a bit?
They do. Yeah. When you do it, you're really proud and you use that as part of your identity as a designer.
Yeah, I mean, it's also not that easy to produce here. And when I was talking to J.W. Anderson last year, he really tried to get, and I think he's managed to get all of his collections manufactured here, I think apart from literally one knitwear piece. But he says that quite often you go and you meet an awful lot of resistance about what you want to do. There aren't people who are prepared to work to the quality that you want, and it's actually a fight. It's not simply a question of, you know, backing British design. It's, you know, manufacturing. It's, you know, really having to push to get what you want done, and, you know, to make sure there are the people out there with the skill set to do what you want to achieve.
I think it's very similar to the Japanese ethics of production as well, where you almost have to build a relationship with the manufacturer, even if it's a little factory in Scotland or wherever, to actually invest and go and meet with them, rather have this email relationship. That's going to reinforce them delivering on time, which is the big thing for the designers. They've got to get it in time delivered to the stores.
Do you find it like it actually increases an appeal of a brand to you if you think that they are kind of a bit more in tune with that kind of Britishness? Do you think?
Well, I've been collaborating with a knitwear label who use grannies. Yeah, that's the way she's gone about it, and that's what drew me to her, Eid, and yeah, she's got pictures of them on her website, so you can see who's knitting the pieces.
Oh my god, what's her name?
And it's Eid, E-D-E,
okay.
and this season we've done little crop tops, and apparently they were like, what are we making? Because they look like kids were explaining, you know, they stretch and they're quite amazing. Small pieces, yeah, so.
This brings to kind of another issue which I'd like to talk about, which is this idea of having fashion split into cities, because we've had some panels where we're, especially over New York, where people are like, oh, I don't think it's helpful to talk about them as a New York designer. You know, people make these unfair sort of like blanket statements about what New York designers are like and London designers. Do you think that's true? Would you rather see people just treat, you know, Sibling as a brand, not a London brand, and try and impose what people already think about London onto that? Do you think people often get sort of tarred by the same?
I think if they were here, a lot of us know them, they'd be shouting out London, we're London, and they'd be really proud of that.
They're very proud of the heritage, and it's a very, they're very proud of the English, but they also like the fact that they've kind of, spun it on its head slightly.
And they like British music, I think one of the inspirations for the last show is polystyrene, and they like a lot of punk era stuff and subversive.
Well, the menswear was the poly.
But they use a lot of the menswear in the womenswear as well, the influences, so which is great because that's part of establishing a brand and having an identity.
So talk to me about being a brand and having this very kind of fixed identity and this fixed idea of what you want to create, but managing to sort of move that forward each season, because it seems to be this constant thing that we end up discussing on the panels, but I always find it really interesting because people are always like, young designers should have the confidence to continue to explore an idea from collection to collection to collection, but then you also have people going, but the whole point of fashion is doing something new and innovating, and how do you get that right? How do you advise young people working and say, look, this is what you need to do?
I think one of the problems that designers have, which is something that you just don't realise, it's a bit like when you're in the fashion industry. By the time the spring collections go in the shop, it's kind of old news for us because we've all been working, or we're all familiar with it for a while. And I think it's the same for the designers. By the time they put out that collection, they've lived, slept and breathed it, and it's almost like they get to the point where they can't stand the sight of it. So they're very ready to reinvent themselves every season, and actually I think they've got most designers that I know have a perverted pleasure out of putting themselves under that pain. Fred included.
Talk to us about that, Fred. Where does that come from? It's like therapy now.
I think I come from an angle that I just like making interesting things. So that's always my thing. I want to make something that's never been seen before. That's the whole point. That's what excites you when you're sitting there doing it. That's what turns you on. But I think it's important to keep some kind of theme going so that buyers know that when the customers come in, they can identify it every season. If they want to buy your thing, that it stands out. So you can't go. But then I guess your taste always dictates it's going to be a certain way. You can't get rid of that, can you? So.
But I think it's an interesting point because, Fred and Sibling are both, it's very obviously Sibling and it's very obviously Fred. So yes, they might reinvent, but it's so obviously them. But there are lots of designers where from season to season you're like,
Christopher Kane.
That's incredible, there's a sort of identity shift every season, and I think from a designer's point of view, it's very interesting to be able to carry it on in the way that Fred does and Sibling does. It's very obviously them, and I think that's really strong. Particularly in a market where actually more and more we're seeing collections which they feel like sales collections. There's a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of that, and so you end up sort of watching a show going, where was the identity? And I think what's really interesting about Sibling is that they're very, very sort of strict and tight, and we know it's them. I think that's really good.
This is interesting because it brings up something we were talking about when we did our book club discussion, when we were talking about the pattern book, which I keep relentlessly plugging, but I do think it's amazing.
How wonderful.
Book. It was so good. It's so good. But we talked about longevity and what makes a brand be able to stay, because we were talking about in the context of Sample, which came out in 2005, and you mentioned, you said a lot of the people who were in that book aren't showing anymore, they're not around, those brands don't exist, and it got me thinking about it's a really depressing thing to think about, but it got me thinking about the schedule at the moment and thinking how great everyone is, and you want to think that these people will be showing for years and years and years, but then you always have that thing in your back of your mind where it's like very difficult. And what do you think ensures that a brand will continue to be able to sort of show in 5 or 6 years? And it's a really sad thing to talk about.
I mean, I think that the whole cycle is exhausting. I mean, you're talking about inspiration, and it gets to that point where maybe you've been doing that for 10 years and you're just suddenly like, I actually can't do this to myself. You're saying people have a perverse pleasure in doing that. I remember I interviewed Dirk Beckenbergs a few years ago, and he used to be really avant-garde, high fashion. And he just said it suddenly got to the point where he said every 6 months you have to reinvent the wheel. And I was doing it for 10 years, and suddenly I just went, actually I don't want to, so I want to run a successful brand that makes lots of money. And it's really mentally exhausting, physically exhausting. You put yourself through that big adrenaline drive, the sleepless nights, and I think particularly if you're doing a kind of big reinvention and a big aesthetic renewal every season, it gets tiring. I think people who've got very good teams around them makes a big difference, actually. I think if you've got somebody intelligent, helping you with the business side of stuff. That makes a huge difference. I think people that want to control everything themselves and do everything themselves from the business perspective often find that they end up putting more time and effort into the business side than they do into the designing side eventually as well. Mandi, I'm sure you've
I think it's a little bit like PR agencies that do sales. You can't be good at both. You always have to shine at one or the other, even though you want to be great at both. So I think, like you're saying, a designer is either going to be really on top of that business side, or they're going to neglect the business and be really great at the creative. It's really hard. But the great thing about Sibling is that there's three of them, and the emotional support is incredible, isn't it? You know, I mean, I run my business on my own, and I kind of envy people that have that camaraderie and they can push each other up the whole time.
Because they've got complementary skill sets, I mean, Cosette's got a background in kind of more of the business side, hasn't she, as well? Well, I mean, you obviously know them.
Yeah, you guys know them. Tell me about how they work.
They're really hardcore realists.
Yeah.
You know, but one of the things that, and again, we know them really well. I think they're really gracious. Like they're on social media 24/7. They clearly don't go to bed. But whenever they get any press, they thank everybody. I mean, I've worked with young designers. I mean, I know how I behave with people. It's very easy to not thank somebody, you know, and somebody won't think, oh, they didn't thank me, they're rude. They won't think that. But it's such a special thing if you do genuinely thank people the whole time. And it's little polite ethics like that just make a difference.
And do you think that they keep each other, the combination of having three, they keep each other much more grounded and calm than you perhaps,
Sanity, isn't it?
So would you guys advise young designers never to do it by themselves? Always get someone in for moral support?
Well, it's an interesting point because you look at Christopher Kane and he's got his sister, and it works very well when you've got a family member. Is that James Long, Christopher Kane, when you've got a sibling?
Yeah. Good pun.
That's why they call it that.
Rounds of applause. Someone had to do it.
To actually support the business side of it, it works so well for Christopher and James, and I'm sure there's many others that.
But actually, Sibling is a bit of a metaphor because they're very popular on the London scene, going out, another East End based designer camp. But they've got really good friendships, and there's a lot of people that want to help them. So they don't just rely on each other. They've got a lot of outside people rooting for them.
And physically helping. Last season.
Oh yes, Princess Julia was in this week helping them out.
I think there's also this thing where they're not just straight out of school, straight into their own label as well. They've been working in the industry for quite a while, which makes a big difference.
And Sid makes knitwear for a lot of the top brands, Long Van,
all
Giles,
the big fashion
houses.
In fact, there was one year when I think Todd Lynn had a dilemma with his production, and Sibling was so under it in the run-up to their show, but they still helped Todd. I mean, sometimes it's like, I don't think I would have done that. If you're really busy and under it, but they're really good. They give out that good karma.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, the fact that they were in the industry before, because I think it's something people don't know, because I think people always talk about like new young designers, and with Sibling, I think they often get that, people are just like this new exciting brand. But would you always want to advise people, do you think there is too much pressure to start a brand when you come straight out of college, and people think that if you don't kind of jump at it, if you go and work in-house, that's you said.
It depends what gets offered to you. You kind of, maybe it's not even a choice. I know some people that have, been given a sponsorship, and so of course they've run with it because they've been given that opportunity. I think,
there's also
fate has a lot to do with.
Sorry, there's also a big problem where if you were offered a sponsorship, let's say you're offered a new gen show that you haven't really thought of showing, and I've seen this a few times, no one has actually turned around and said, oh, thanks so much, I'd really love to have a show, but I'm not quite ready. So you are kind of, you haven't got any money, and you almost need to grab that little money that you would get to do a show. And not only that, when you do get that sponsorship money, it doesn't pay for the show. I've worked with a lot of designers where the following 2 seasons they're still paying for the models from that sponsored show. So, but going on to what you said about Sibling being, more experienced, I actually did a project with them last summer, and that made a very big difference. The client was very impressed. A young designer wouldn't have been able to deal with the project like they did. They were so proficient, it almost helped the decision to pick them when we presented it to the client.
Because we were talking about manufacturing earlier, and having that grounding in the industry already makes, it means you've already got relationships with the manufacturers as well, which...
Why are designers starting so young? Why is there such this focus on it? Because now I think about it, there is this thing that, like, you graduate from St Martin's, you start your own label. Why has that become such a kind of...
It's a trend, it's a fashion, because everything is so fast, isn't it? So content is just, everyone's obsessed about that. Editors at magazines, they get to the place where they're at the highest point because they're the best known for finding the newest, freshest thing that no one else has got access to. That's where we are at the moment, isn't it? Yeah.
And I think also, people leaving college, if they don't produce collection, if they don't do it, there's that fear of, there's that fear that, what's happened to them? They've fallen off the edge of the earth, and fashion just forgets about them. It's that, and that's a lot what drives that, I think. Aitor Throop's quite an interesting case in point, because he's only just produced his first ready-to-wear collection.
He displayed incredible confidence by going that route.
Yeah. And he did fabulous consultancies, he did Umbro, he did Stone Island, and various other things. But, sort of 7 years on, he's just released his first ready-to-wear collection, and I think that takes an enormous amount of confidence and enormous bravery.
Self-belief.
To go, I'm not doing it, I'm not ready, I'm going to wait, I'm going to wait.
And I mean, it's all quite recent as well, because if you look at somebody like Martin Margiela, he left college, he went to work for a raincoat manufacturing company, and then he worked for Jean-Paul Gaultier as his assistant, and this all happened, I think he left school in 1981, his first collection was 1989, so there's that huge period when he's learning the technique of creating classic trench coats, he's watching somebody that's really out there in the public eye, and he's making all the decisions about how he wants to run his business before he then launches.
And the same with McQueen and Galliano. They both did time at...
It's apprenticeships.
They both did time on Savile Row, and then McQueen went to Givenchy, was it?
Yeah, Givenchy. Well, he launched his own label, and then he was at Givenchy, It's strange because I think it's such a London thing, actually. The more we talk about it, you don't see that elsewhere. You don't see that kind of
I think it is happening. I mean, I was talking to Geert Brelut that does the Antwerp shows. And he says, he's been doing them now for 25 years for the Academy, and he says that it's changed so much in that time, and that now this is seen as your calling card. You've got the international jury, you've got the eyes of the international press on you, the photographs are being circulated, and it is seen as that moment where you launch, and everybody is expecting to go from that into creating their own label now.
Do you think there is an element of truth in the fact that, if you show, say you're in the St Martin show or the LCF show, and everyone's really impressed by you, and then you do go work in-house, do you think there is an element of truth to the fact that you would slightly drop off the radar? Because it's hard to think of, the other feasible options out there for young designers that keep them a profile.
But I mean, I think it's interesting what Fred was saying, that, it's the fashion to always want to have the new thing, the new thing, the new thing. And the problem is that once you start entering that game, there's always going to be the next new thing coming up behind you. So you can maybe kind of stay up there for a couple of years. But, and as Mandi was saying as well, if you've got all of that financial pressure on you, and you've got that pressure of trying to maintain a profile, it's really difficult to kind of keep going, I think.
I think though, sorry Fred, but recently those people that were second in command at these labels have been written about, recognised. So maybe that is, how it is nowadays. Those people do shine in the design studio.
And I think on the flip side to what we were saying about people that get offered sponsorship, some people come out of college and get offered fabulous jobs, and then they take it. So in a way that, again, you've got that thing where actually the decision is kind of made for them. But people like Phoebe Philo, and there's lots of people who've kind of gone through and sort of become very, very well known working straight in house.
Yeah, and actually I remember Anthony Vaccarello, who has just kind of really started to come through in the last couple of years. I was at his graduation show, and I remember he was absolutely the star, and he went on to win the Hier award the year afterwards, and he went and worked at Fendi in the fur department for a few years, and I think it's come through for him doing it like that. So I don't think it is necessarily the only way to go to kind of come straight out.
Yeah, I think if something really stood out at the time, you're going to remember it. So if they've got a game plan and they do go and work for someone else and find all the factories and everything and keep all of that information and then launch, you're not going to have forgotten it. Like Laura Mackness, I absolutely loved her graduate collection, and I think she's working in the house.
Who is she?
Laura Mackness. Do you remember? Oh my God, she did a collection that had huge eyelashes on it, and on the knees, and it was all flesh colour with a bit of black and yellow. She did lollipop sticks, a dress out of yellow. Yeah, and so
where was she
you know, when she comes back, you know, I'm going to be right there. Yeah.
There was something, Hettie, you said that kind of struck me a little bit, where you said, you know, there's always this focus on the new, and it got me thinking about the schedule, because we've had quite a lot of moaning people on here where they're like, the schedule is too busy, I can't go to everything, which is really fair enough for London. But then it makes me think, you know, like, it's a very pragmatic point, but what's going to happen? Because you're like, more people come out of college, they set up their own brands, and it's just, it can't, is London going to become a 2-week-long schedule? You know, where's the room going to come for those new labels? But it's so saturated at the moment in a brilliant way, like it's amazing.
I think, you know, I think whether you're doing a poetry festival or a comedy festival or a theatre festival or a music festival, it's always going to, you know, I don't know if you know, if you go to a big music festival, there's always going to be that gig that you miss, but then everybody's talking about it. So it kind of ends up filtering through where it becomes, you know, the people that everybody, you know, everybody's gossiping about, everybody's saying, oh my God, did you see that? Even if you didn't actually catch the show, you know, these days you can see the images. So I think it ends up creating its own kind of democratic sense.
The BFC filter, a lot of the designers have a really good panel, and so when the next wave of designers come through, there might be somebody who's emerging, who's at the colleges and about to graduate, and they're all buzzing about it. But actually, it's quite a democratic process, because they will say in their discussion, oh, it's probably a bit early for them. This one needs to go. Yeah, you know, it's like any profession where you have to make those decisions.
I have one more thing I want to talk about, then maybe we can have a little break while we wait for images, because I really need some more tea. But I want to talk a bit about money, because this always comes up, and I was watching a thing that Crane did where they asked young designers what the big challenge was, and everyone says money, and we haven't actually talked about it on a panel, which is a big thing to miss out. But it is such a problem for young people working. And can you tell me a bit about the kind of the cost of a show and the kind of challenges that young people face? Because I think it's something that our viewers probably actually know very little about, because it is kind of...
Well, I've done loads of shows for no money at all, and I don't care what anybody says, but you can do a show for nothing. And, you know, people always say, but I can't afford a venue. I remember one season with Fashion East, one of the designers' PRs said, oh God, I don't know what to do, they can't afford to have invites made. And I was like, oh, for God's sake, go and chop up a potato and do it. You know, it's like, you can do a show for nothing. You just have to go round, find a venue, be imaginative with your thought process. Some venue will give you it for free. I'm not saying it's easy to find, but you can make it happen. And I think there has to be a lot of that. I mean,
models is a tricky one.
Yeah, model, but then they do street casting. One of the best shows I ever did was when Hoxton Square Bar and Kitchen first opened, and Susie Menkes and Sarah from Colette and all fabulous people were there. It was a really elegant show. Michelle had got cherries dipped in chocolate, and we served them on beds of ice. And the models, we got them circus space, let us have a room for free, and the models came out of circus space and walked all the way around Hoxton Square and came in and walked past all the guests, and then there was that lovely window at the back. It was just an imaginative, that show cost nothing, really, and it was so beautiful, and she had buyers, she got picked up, and it was a success. It was off schedule, and it is challenging to do off schedule now, but if you're clever and you wait until the first draft of the schedule comes out, then you just look for a show that isn't such a conflict with the sort of audience you want, and you have to start earning a reputation that way.
And why is it so hard though for young designers starting out who don't have the things is it even possible to exist without having something like Fashion East or New Gen?
I don't know, I'm just a big believer in making it happen, and I think that
that's brilliant.
If you want to do it, you go and get a part-time job. If you can't do it because you're having to do this part-time job, then you do it a little bit to start with. You know, I just think you have to be realistic.
But do you think there's problems where, you know, young designers, they make it happen, they put on a show, they rope in all their friends, and then what if they get orders that they then can't afford to produce? And, you know, there's ongoing issues like.
I think at the moment it's incredibly difficult for anybody that's not absolutely mainstream to guarantee that they can manufacture clothing and deliver it in time. And I think it's very difficult for anybody that's trying to do a kind of auteuristic vision to make sure that they're getting stuff sold. I mean, I've got friends who've closed their fashion labels down the last couple of years because they've gone, all anybody wants is the more mainstream end of my production because I'm small, my manufacturers are putting me right at the back of the schedule, so I'm delivering things late. And I've just, you know, I can keep my head above water, but only just. And also, I mean, I think 5 years ago people could exist on overdrafts and they can't anymore. You know, it's really difficult for small businesses. And so it's that kind of thing where I can keep my head above water, but everything that I loved in this business is gone for me. I think it's super tough. I think if you're going to try and do it without financial support, you need to be pragmatic about what you're making and what's going to sell. Which is not an easy thing to accept when you're starting up and wanting to make a name for yourself. I mean, we were talking about, you know, the image of a brand, and if you're going to try and distinguish yourself and yet create something that buyers are going to pick up for shops.
Well, that's a bleak note to take a break on, but should we take a break, wait for the images, and then restart with some more beverages? So we're back in a few minutes.
Are we allowed to?
We're back live, talking about Sister by Sibling with Fred, Mandi, Jez and Hettie. Unfortunately, as always with technology, we have some imagery problems, but we are going to have a look at what we can see of the fabulous collection using SHOWstudio's own Twitter and Instagram feed. And also Mandi has her trump card in terms of the press release. So.
Yeah, I think Cosette would have sent it to all of us. We should have known who was here.
Yeah. What do you guys think from what you can see so far? So we've got teeny little imagery, but first thoughts.
That looks like a kind of giant, like an astrakhan collar kind of made giant, doesn't it? You know, that Turkish lamb's wool.
Astrakhan.
Yeah.
And we all mentioned before they've got Cara walking in the show, so obviously that's kind of...
Well, Katie Grant's styling it, and Cara's one of her girls of the moment. And everyone else is.
Talk to me about this oversized thing that they're doing, because we saw that in the men, you know.
Yeah, the mittens.
The mittens, Mickey Mouse hands.
Well, it's a bit like what Hettie said earlier about how if they're going to go for it, they're not just going to do the chunk that has sparkles and everything, but that is not going to be in the selling collection. So they know that the show is theatre, and they know that as a young label they need to get press, and I think they're doing it in the right way.
What was interesting with those big lobster mittens is that they definitely became a point of reference because of the Alexander Wang collection when he had the big furry ones.
I think some of the other designers
there were people immediately going,
oversized,
So,
you know, all those oversized pieces are hand knitted by Sid, who's one of Sibling. They're not going to be produced, or he will, if you want to sell them in your shop, he may knit you a pair.
Oh, that's amazing. We'll have to get him to do that, actually. That's amazing.
So they've got big tam o' shantons this time, because I think last time they had, what was the name? That was in the menswear. The big ones were based on the hat worn by that transsexual country singer. Is it Jane County?
What have you Googled?
Is it Jane? I think it's Jane County.
Yeah.
Was formerly known as Wayne.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's Wayne Jane County. Yeah.
And there were the hats that.
Like the pudding
she wore when she was kind of going through the transformation, and they were just like these enormous blood platelet shaped things.
What was that word that you said before about Paula Yates?
Tangential.
Yeah, because you're right.
You don't look at that and think Paula, do you?
So what do the show notes say for this season?
I think it's that kind of it's a kind of counterculture English rose, isn't it?
And do I detect a little 90s in that? And I really like all the textures, which we knew that Sibling wouldn't let us down with. And as we can see from all the tweets and the information that Sibling have supplied, they've been inspired by Paula Yates for the collection, who's the as Joe from Sibling would say, she's the archetypal British housewife. But she's almost like a subversive housewife, because she always wore very proper.
And that's very akin to them, you know, it's a very traditional piece, you know, a piece of knitwear, but completely subverted.
I should mention actually that in her heyday I was working at Brown's, and I remember once she came in, she'd had an outfit altered, and I had to go down to this little reserve area to get the outfit for her. And I was like, and you had to bend down because it was a low alcove, and I was going, oh God, where the hell is it? I was looking for ages, I couldn't find it. And I thought, now I'm going to be really methodical, and I'm just going to go through everything down here. And in the end, I worked it out. It said Lady P. Geldof.
Oh. So is this what we were I know we've got a very hazy view, but is this what we were expecting to see from Sibling?
Well, it's quite interesting, those kind of twin sets up there. I mean, it'd be really interesting to see more of that print going on. Which I guess when they're talking about and they were mentioning chintz as well. We've got the matching teacups.
I know.
I think they're going to mix the chintz with polka dots, which sounded interesting as well. And going back to twin set, one of the things that I love about Sibling is that they do the proper little twin set, but then they'll do a skirt. So it's almost like a hyper-real version of a twin set. It's like, how would you say, a triple set or something? It's just, you know, the only thing that's missing is pearls.
And I guess we saw that with the last season's collection as well. They were carrying interior, this kind of upholstery fabrics. They were taking a toile de jouy into garment fabrics, and I guess they're doing that again with the chintz here.
Did you know what that print was?
But it was a toile de jouy of the riots, wasn't
London
it?
riots, yeah. And it,
did they collaborate with Timorous Beasties on that? Because I know Timorous Beasties have been doing stuff like that for a while.
I don't know whether they did it, but we did a project with them last Fashion Week with W London, and they had a tea shop, and we were talking about them having cushions, and actually that was the graphic we put to the client, and I hadn't realised it was inappropriate for the W London to have London riots all over their lounge.
This goes back to what we were saying about it being very British, though, and very proud of being British in a quite a sort of fun, quite subversive way. You know, things like a twin set and chintz and the riots. You know, it's all different aspects of British life.
Yeah, they're punks, Sibling.
Proper punks.
It's great.
Just from the images we can see here, they're quite wearable, albeit oversized hats. There's no like full face covering this season, is there? Because normally, I wonder if they'll come later.
They're very Baker Boy, aren't they?
Yeah.
So how would you guys like to see Sibling take things forward? Where would you like to see them go next? Be it a collaboration, or be it something different for them, their line? What would you like to see them do?
This already looks very, I mean, although there's the oversized stuff, the silhouettes they've got here seem quite different from what they were doing before. And I mean, there was a lot of much more pattern-based work before, and this seems to be taking the knits in a kind of architectural way, and really looking at them as something that creates, you know, volume and different textures.
And using the texture as a colour palette.
It's quite sophisticated there, you know, in terms of the palette.
It really is.
So I guess that goes back to the Paula Yates thing of, you know, undermining that very kind of prim and proper silhouette.
I think they've done that quite well with the sneakers, haven't they?
They are punks. I'm interested that you say that. So who are we looking forward to for the rest of London? Who are going to be the highlights? Apart from Fred.
I'm really looking forward to what you do. You're doing an installation, aren't you?
Yeah, I've got a space on Monmouth Street that's a half shop, half exhibition that I've done with Thomas Petherick, and we've got a film showing that we did with Saga Sig, and it's about opening up my world to everyone, because I haven't really done anything merch-wise before. Yeah. So that's what I'm doing. But I'm looking forward to Fashion East, to see all of those designers. That's always a highlight. And what else? Jez, you're good in attending.
Louise Gray?
Oh, Louise.
Yeah.
Louise
Everyone says Louise Gray.
Louise is the one that I'm really excited about.
Yeah. Well, I think we should give Sibling a round of applause. I'm very sad that we can't see it better, but it looks fabulous.